that Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the one who created whatever He created by way of the asbab, by the ways and means. Right? We're entering into a discussion about Allah's creation now. Right? And the fact that Allah has created His creation through mechanisms and ways and means which He has created. Right? And Allah is the creator of the means and the one who decreed it. And these means, the things which are the means, are themselves in need of Allah. Right? We'll explain what this means shortly, inshallah, with examples. He then says, وَلَيْسَ فِي الْمَخْلُوقَاتِ سَبَبٌ مُسْتَقِلٌ بِفِعْلٍ وَلَا دَفْعِ ضَرَرٍ بَلْ كُلُّ مَا هُوَ سَبَبٌ فهو محتاج إلى سبب آخر يعاونه وإلى ما يدفع عنه الضد الذي يعارضه ويمانعه. So he says, there is not in this creation an independent cause, any cause which is independent in its act or in repelling any harm. Rather, everything which is a cause is in need of yet another cause, which it requires for support and aid, or it is in need of what will repel the opposite from it, which contends and opposes it. Right? I know this is some complicated, it's the sentence is a bit whatever, but if I give you an example, you will immediately grasp what is being said here. So I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate the point. So let's take water for example. Right? There is life, right? So Allah has created life, has He not? Yes, there is life. But life itself is by way of other causes, right? Through certain means. So life isn't just an idea. Life, as it exists, needs causes. Allah created life, but He created causes, right? So one of those causes of life is water. So water is one of the means or the mechanisms through which life arises, exists, persists, and subsists, meaning it continues, and this is how it continues. Water. So Allah made water a means for life. He also made water a means for something else, like, for example, quenching thirst. Is that not right? You are thirsty, you drink water, and the thirst is quenched. Right? So the water is a means for the quenching of thirst. However, is that absolutely true? Is that absolutely true? Like, say for example, all of you people here, and we're all thirsty, and we send some water around, and everyone drinks from the water, and we have one person who, no matter how much he drinks the water, his thirst is not being quenched. So why is it that the water is quenching thirst for everybody else, but it's not quenching thirst for one person, right? And let's say this one person, he had a very salty meal beforehand, right? So he's had a very salty meal. And as you know, when you have a very salty meal, salty water does not quench your thirst. So you can't drink seawater if you're out in the sea and stranded. You will die, right? And so likewise, if you had a very salty meal and you try to drink water, even though quenching thirst is a property of water, it is not independent in that effect. it has to have other conditions or the absence of preventive barriers, right? So water will only quench thirst in the absence of other barriers. So it means that obviously you haven't had a salty meal, or, for example, you could be sick and you vomit anytime you drink a fluid, meaning you have an illness and you drink water and straight away you're sick and it expels the water. Here the water is not going to quench your thirst if you happen to be thirsty, right? So the point being behind this illustration is that even though we know that water almost always, it quenches thirst, and quenching thirst is like a property that Allah has put in water. But is water really truly independent in its ability to quench thirst? Like, is it an absolute necessity by virtue of it being a property of water that it will always quench thirst? And the answer is no. The answer is no, right? Because it depends upon something else as well outside of itself, right? And this applies to everything in creation. Everything in creation is like this. The sun, the moon, the clouds, the rain, your eye and how it sees, your ear and how it hears, right? Like the hearing itself is not just the ear. There's a whole range of other things, internal to you and external to you as well. Internal to you, there's the ear obviously, and then there's whatever connection is between the ear and to the heart and to the brain, and then the processing, and then the neural kind of connections and everything. And then external to you, well, obviously the air as a medium through which sound, the disturbances in the air, through which sound is created, and it comes to you. So there's a whole range of other things which are involved, and the same with water. The same with water. And then also, there's also a spectrum of causality, right? There's a spectrum, right? So on the one hand here, there are some things which are very strongly tied to their effects, right? So an example would be water quenching your thirst. We know overwhelmingly it always quenches thirst. Is that correct? Yes? Or for example, fire will always burn. Fire will always burn, except like rare situations where there's too much moisture in the thing that you're trying to burn, or you have some protective, there's something you can rub on your hands and it won't really burn you because it's acting as a insulation kind of thing. Right? But overwhelmingly, fire will always burn. Right? The property in the fire that leads to its effect is very, very strong in these kind of issues, right? So here we're on this side of the very strong end of causality. It's almost like as if it's like a one-to-one, fire burning, water quenching thirst, right? It's like almost seems like one-to-one, right? Cause to effect. Even though we know that even with this, that's not true, right? There's no such thing as an independent cause in creation. Every single cause requires other causes, other means that Allah has put in creation, right? But within the scheme of creation, there are some things where the causes are very direct, and almost like linear and monocausal, I mean just like pretty much just one cause from our point of view, right? Then as you move away from that, you start getting a looser connection, right? So the next example I can give you is, for example, intercourse between a man and his wife, and whether it will lead to a child or not. We know that a child can only be produced through that act, except in the case of Adam alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. But generally, it's only by that act. However, does the act always lead to a child? Of course it doesn't, because there are, there are numerous other factors involved here now, and the causal connection is not as strong as it is with water quenching thirst and fire burning. Now it's like there's more, because there's more causes involved and more conditions required and more preventive barriers that could be possibly involved, like the effect of the cause isn't as strong anymore, right? So, as you know, husband and wife don't always have children straight away after a while, or sometimes not at all, because of a whole range of different reasons. Some of them could be just purely, wrong time of the month. Others could be more to do with defects and issues, right? So here the causality is a bit more loose compared to water and whatever. Then you can keep going down the spectrum to the other side, where the causality is just like so loose and involves so many different factors that, like it'd be very hard for you to even find like a causal connection even, right? And you would start really making presumptions and assumptions about the true causes of things, right? So we have causality is strong on this side, and then it goes weaker, and then you go to the other spectrum where it's like so many factors and so many could be hidden things that you wouldn't really, right? And so this is what, since we are on this topic of causes and causality, this is why the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he spoke about the issue of contagion and so-called infectious disease. Because this is something that can affect a person's creed, a person's feelings, a person's thoughts, a person's emotions, and a person's behavior. And it's something in which mistakes can be made in the issue of causality, right? You can make mistakes in causality. When you start making mistakes in causality and you exaggerate, this is the basis of, when you start believing in superstition and omens and things of that nature. And that's why the Messenger of Allah, he actually spoke about this issue. He spoke about this issue and he gave guidance with respect to this issue. And he explained and he removed the misconceptions which exist in relation to causality. All right? And I will give you a quick illustration. The hadith of the Messenger of Allah where he mentioned 6 things. He said, La adwa, there is no contagion. Wala tiyara, and there is no omen. There's no omen in the overhead flight of birds. Wala safar, and there's no omen in the month of Safar. Wala hamma, and there's no omen in the night owl. Wala nawun, and there is no, it's to do with the constellations, right? And believing that constellations, if the moon phase is in a particular constellation, then such and such will happen, or it has some connection to worldly events, right? Wala ghawl, and there is no this kind of like a type of jinn that people used to believe would come and harm them in their journey, right? So all of these things that the Messenger of Allah mentioned, they are all connected to causality, making mistakes in causality. So for example, there's no omen in the overhead flight of birds. What the pagan Arabs used to believe, and all nations have their own types of omens. They used to believe that if, a bird came and it flew overhead and it went towards the left, for example, this was a sign of some potential evil, right? And so if they were going to set out on a journey or they were going to do something, they would abandon that thing out of superstition, thinking that something bad was going to happen. But there's no connection. There's no connection between a bird flying overhead and, Allah Azza wa Jal did not make any connection between these things in His creation. Right? But you have to ask yourself, how did this arise? Like, how do omens and superstition, how does it arise? It arises because maybe one day some guy was just, a bird flew overhead to the left, and he just happened, maybe the wheels of his, horse and cart fell off, and he just, thought that had to do with the bird. And then some other guy in another town, he had a similar experience, right? The bird flew overhead, he went and he fell into a ditch. Then a third guy from some other place, he has the same experience. Then these guys meet together and say, oh, you know what? Yeah, there's a bird flew and I saw it go to the left and, the wheel fell off my cart. He goes, oh, yeah, same thing happened to me. Yeah, so the bird flew and, I was walking and it just fell into a ditch. And now it gets turned into causality. They think, there must be some causal connection here. And this is how superstitions start, you see. Right? And false causation is the starting point of what leads to minor shirk. Believing in superstition, believing in omens, and then abandoning actions on a false basis, which has no basis. Right? This is the starting point of minor shirk. Right? So here the Messenger of Allah said, there is no omen in the overhead flight of birds, because Allah Azza wa Jal did not make any connection in His creation. There's no connection between a bird flying overhead over you and whatever's going to happen in your journey. There's zero connection. So therefore, for you to avoid traveling because a bird flew overhead, this is pure superstition. Right? So he negated that. Right? He negated that. I'll come back to contagion once I've gone through the other 4 or 5, yeah? So he negated that. Then he said, وَلَا طِيرَ وَلَا صَفَرْ وَلَا صَفَرْ. وَلَا صَفَرْ meaning here, there's no omen in the month of Safar. Because the people used to believe that in the month of Safar, that, it was a bad month to travel in, do business, get married or whatever. And again, the same thing, you ask yourself, how did people start believing that Safar is a month of evil or something? Same thing. People experience bad things in the month of Safar, has got no connection to the month, and then they start talking and whatever, and eventually something develops where, it's a bad month to do this, whatever. Right, so a false notion of causality develops and turns into superstition and omen. So the Messenger of Allah, he negated that. Right? Then he said, وَلَا هَامَةٍ. وَلَا هَامَةٍ is basically what the pagan Arabs used to believe, is that when someone had been murdered or killed, there would be, from his grave, there would appear, through the soul or whatever it might be, an owl would appear. And if that owl went and basically perched on the top of someone's roof and made its like the typical noise that an owl makes, someone in that household would die. So they took it as an omen. So again, you have to ask yourself, how on earth does something like this develop? How do people start believing this? Very simple. Some guy gets murdered, and on the night, after the funeral, there's a guy sitting around, and then basically some owl comes along from the direction of the grave, and it perches upon someone's house, and then it starts making its noise, and then overnight some guy dies in that house, and then think, oh gosh, that must have been an owl. Right? And they start believing in there's some causal. They think there's some kind of causal link between these events. And so basically superstition and omen develops out of all this. And then it becomes narrated and spread and people believe it. Yeah? So he denied wala hamma. Then he said wala naw'un. There is no, this is referring to the constellations, right, where you have the moon and it has a certain phase. It could be half moon, full moon, three-quarter, whatever it might be. And it appears in the backdrop of a particular constellation, right? So there are 12, the sky is divided into, 12 lots of 30 degrees, and in each of those 30 degrees there's a particular constellation which identifies that section. So if the moon is in that phase, then they'd believe that such and such thing is going to happen, or a war is likely, or there's going to be a victory or a defeat or a plague or a disease or rain or whatever it might be, right? Something along those lines. And there is no such thing, because there's no causal connection between the moon being here in the backdrop of a particular constellation, or a planet being here, or a star being, and between events upon there's no connection. There is no connection, right? So he denied that as well. And then wala ghawl. This is like when people go on a journey and they just have this fear that maybe there's some jinn or something, and maybe they're on the journey, they have an encounter with someone, they meet some guy on the journey, and the guy says, oh yeah, you want to be in that direction between the hills. Right, so they go in that direction between the hills, and as they go on that way, it turns out it's a bad path, and they have some misfortune, and then they say, oh, that guy could have actually been a jinn. Maybe he just deliberately misdirected us, and whatever. But it's all just it's just presumption and suspicion. Could be no truth to it, right? So you can see that in all of these examples, it's very easy to imagine something to be a cause when it isn't. And that's why the Messenger, he spoke about all these things. And so likewise, in the same context, is the issue of contagion. Right? So-called infectious disease. Right? Because this is something where the true causes can be very hidden and very obscure. And it's very easy for the human mind to start imagining and presuming that somehow the disease is jumping from one person to the other when no such thing exists. And this has happened frequently in history, over and over again, right? So I'll give you a few examples. An example would be a disease called scurvy. Scurvy, right? Scurvy was a disease that used to happen on ships. People would travel from this side of the Atlantic to the other side, and on these journeys, people would start, they would lose their teeth, they would start going mad basically and drop down dead, right? So they would think that this is some sort of disease, contagious disease that's, coming onto the ship, and then, bit by bit it's getting one sailor, then the next day another sailor, then a group, then, and they all start dying, and they think, my gosh, where's this? They believe that there's contagion. And it turns out that the real and true underlying cause of why this is happening is because of a chronic deficiency in vitamin C, and that's it. So when some guy decided to, take some lemons with him or some limes with him, and he was perfectly fine, and everybody else was being affected, then they realized. Then they start taking lemons and oranges with them on these journeys, and the disease disappeared. Had nothing to do with any microbe or germ or any kind of, anything like that. But it's very easy now to imagine and start fearing, he's got scurvy, I better keep away from him because, I'm going to get the disease. It's got nothing to do with mixing. It's got to do with your diet and chronic deficiency in an essential vitamin. Right? That's not the only example. There's more examples of this. Pellagra is another disease. Pellagra is a disease that they used to think was contagious. But you get dementia, you get dermatitis, skin problem, you get diarrhea and death. Right? So you might think, oh, there's bacteria on the skin. There's a bacteria going around, spreading from person to person. But it's not. Because this disease is because of a chronic deficiency in a B vitamin. right? I forgot whether it's B3 or B6, or it's one of the B vitamins, right? And as soon as the people alter the diet, the disease disappeared. But it's very easy for you now, because if you're not having enough of that B vitamin, your skin is not able to regenerate properly, so you start getting dermatitis. And when you get dead skin, the bacteria come to break it down, right? That's why you get those blisters and possibly maybe an infection on the skin, right? And then someone can quite easily think, oh, look, we found some bacteria. The cause of this illness is bacteria. It's actually not. The bacteria has simply turned up on the scene to do some cleanup work. It wasn't the cause of the problem. The true underlying cause of the problem is the chronic deficiency in a B vitamin. As soon as you address that problem, the disease disappears. The skin goes back to normal. The bacteria won't need to be there anymore because they don't need to do that job anymore. Right? So the point being that because disease is complex, has many parameters, many factors, multi-causal, multifactorial, and its ways and means are often hidden to the eye, it's very easy to start imagining contagion, right, when no such thing exists. And you can then start fearing people and keeping away from people based upon pure imagination, suspicion, presumption, and there's no truth to it at all. And then you would do yourself harm by anxiety and fear and make yourself ill for no reason. That's why the Messenger of Allah, he gave us guidance in this issue, right? He said, the general command is obviously keep the sick away from the healthy. Why is this? So that you are not put to trial by the anxiety and the fear of the baseless fear of contagion, right? So, for example, if I mixed with you and you had a cold or a flu, then I'm going to start thinking, oh, I mixed with him and maybe I'm going to get a cold or a flu, right? So first of all, it gives me anxiety and whatever. Secondly, if I got the cold or the flu, I might start thinking that I caught the disease from him, when there's no such thing. Basically, whatever gave him the cold or the flu, the causes, right, lack of vitamin D, cold weather, bad diet, not sleeping enough, and all the other factors that come together that trigger a cold or a flu, I could have been subjected to the very same causes, right? And it's just a matter of the cold weather came on a weekend and he got it, and a day later I got it as well, because I'm subjected to the same sum of conditions that made me ill as well. And any mixing that I had with him was purely coincidental. It had nothing to do with me becoming ill. But I can now start to imagine and presume that that was the cause, when it actually wasn't. All right? This is how superstition and omens come into play. And that's why the Messenger, he said, keep the sick away from the healthy. Right? So that this opportunity for this incorrect belief does not arise in the first place. Do you understand? So it's like, if I know you're ill, I'll keep away from you. So then, if I become ill, now I know for sure that it got nothing to do with you because I didn't mix with you. Do you understand? So the opportunity for me to wrongly believe in contagion where it doesn't exist, that opportunity does not exist. Do you understand? So these commands are a bit like when the Messenger of Allah, he said, do not drink alcohol, and nor be at a table where alcohol is being drunk. Do you understand? So do not do the thing, and do not be in a situation which is going to lead you to that thing. Do you understand? That's the same with contagion. There's no contagion, right? But do not mix with the sick. Because if you do, and you become sick for the same reasons that person became sick, you will now start believing in contagion, which is a pure presumption, and right? And then it leads people into that path of false causality, because disease is an area where false causality is rampant. right? And this affects people's behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and so on and so forth, whatever. So the Messenger of Islam, he cut off that door, right? He cut off that problem, just like he did with alcohol, right? Or with fornication, right? Don't be alone with a woman. Do not commit fornication. Do not be alone with a foreign woman, right? With a non-mahram woman, right? Because that leads to that, right? So it's the same type of guidance here, basically. So the whole point in what's being mentioned here, Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned the issue of causality and how Allah is the creator of all things. He is the creator of all causes. And there's no such thing as one independent cause on its own creating an effect. No such thing exists in creation. Because the only true independent cause is Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? He is the only true independent cause from which all causes and effects arise. As for what's in this creation, there is no such thing. Even the water is not an independent cause. Even though it has the very strong property or from its properties is quenching thirst. Overwhelmingly that's what it does, but it's not absolute. Right? It's not independent. It requires a whole host of other things around. It requires other things around it. Right? And the same with disease as well. Disease is something where you can very easily, instead of it being multi-causal, you just narrow it down and claim there's only one cause. The virus, the germ, the bacteria. Right? When really underneath it's a simpler matter, you're just deficient in vitamin D or zinc. If you weren't deficient in zinc, your cells would have had structural integrity, and they would not be prone to death and breaking down that easily, right? And so you would not have got a cold or a flu or what they call an infection, right? Selenium, zinc, vitamin D, all these are proven, established, right? So the issue of causality is very, very important. And that's why it's dangerous for us as Muslims to leave the disbelievers to dominate in the various sciences, which they build upon their materialism and their disbelief and their false theories, right? Like Darwinism, evolution, and all the other stuff that they build their theories upon, right? It's a very materialistic representation of Allah's creation, right? Allah, His names, His attributes are completely out. No connection between Allah's names and attributes and what He created. It's a blank slate, right? To the materialists. Then they generate theories and ideas from the ramblings and the nonsense in their minds, and they come up with their theories and ideas, right? And then these ideas then penetrate every other science, astronomy, biology, physics, molecular biology, whatever. And it's a purely materialistic presentation, right? And so we as Muslims, if we leave them to be the pioneers and to be the experts or alleged experts, then this is something very, very dangerous, right? And because this issue of the asbab, what Allah created and the ways and means and the causes which He tied to their effects, is something that can affect creed, as we've seen in these examples, then that's something that's very, very dangerous, right? Which shows the danger of we being blind followers of the disbelievers in these sciences. It can lead us to corruption and behaviors which are not sound. So anyway, I wanted to mention that because here Ibn Taymiyyah raised the topic of the asbab, right? Everything Allah has created in His creation, it is by way of asbab, by way of ways and means that He created, right? So whether it is physical things, life requires water, requires air, requires oxygen, requires sunlight, right? There's so many things that life requires, and Allah made it to be through asbab, right? And the same applies to like everything you see in the creation from a physical, mechanical point of view, right? And all of those asbab, Allah has tied them all together to work uniformly, in cohesion, right? In perfection at the beginning of creation, and then defects arise because of corruption in the hands of men over time, right? Right, but basically there's uniformity, there's coherence in creation. All causes and effects are tied to each other, they are inseparable, and the only true cause is Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So this is the point here that Ibn Taymiyyah is making, that there is no such thing as an independent cause in creation. Every cause requires another cause, or a chain of causes, or a composite of causes, and the only true cause is Allah Azza wa Jal, which is why we make tawakkul upon Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? The attachment of the heart is to Allah Azza wa Jal, not to any one cause, ways or means. Right? Because there's no such thing as an independent cause in creation. Right? The heart is always attached to Allah and relies upon Allah Azza wa Jal, in the things that we do, and in which we want success. So, right. So where is this discussion leading to? What's the point of mentioning this? The point here is that if Allah Azza wa Jal, if everything in creation, if any cause within creation can never be independent and needs something else, then Allah Azza wa Jal is the only one who is Al-Ghani, the one who is free of need. Right? He is the one who is free of need. He's not in need of any other cause, because He is the cause of all causes. So if He is Al-Ghani, if He is the one who is free of need from anything besides Him, therefore He cannot have any partners. He cannot have any partners. There is no sharik for Allah Azza wa Jal. La sharika lah. He doesn't have any partner. He doesn't have anyone who shares with Him. And therefore, so He doesn't need anyone to aid Him, to support Him, to help Him, because He is the true cause, the only cause of all causes and their effects. And so this shows that we as creatures, we are fuqara. We are needy. We are the ones who are in need. Without air, we die. Without water, we die. Without the sun and the alternation of the night and the day, we suffer. We die eventually. Right? We are the ones who are in need. And the same with everything in creation. The leaves need the sun, water, air. Right? Animals need to eat the herbage. Right? The fish need the water, and everything needs something. And it is Allah Azza wa Jal who is Al-Ghani. And so this means that He cannot have any partner, because He doesn't need anyone to help Him or aid Him. Right? And so therefore, this issue of the causes was mentioned here in order to illustrate this point. Right? That Allah alone is worthy of worship. He does not have any partners. He is Al-Ghani, free of all needs, free of all want. He is the true cause of all causes. He placed every cause and its effect. And there's no such thing as an independent cause. Every cause needs other causes around it for it to work, for it to have its effect. Right?